Something has been happening quietly behind the scenes, and you may not even realize it yet. While you have been living your life, focusing on your own path, someone connected to your journey has been going through a deep inner change. It did not happen because of one dramatic moment. It did not happen because someone forced them to face the truth. It happened because they could no longer ignore what their heart had been trying to tell them for a very long time. There comes a point in every person's life when pretending becomes harder than being honest. That moment finally arrived for them. They looked at their life with fresh eyes and realized that some connections were no longer helping them grow. Some relationships had become habits instead of sources of peace. Some people remained in their life only because they had been there for a long time, not because they still belonged there. That realization was not easy to accept, but once it appeared, it refused to disappear. For a while, they tried to convince themselves that nothing had to change. They told themselves to be patient. They believed things would somehow improve if they waited long enough. They hoped that silence would solve problems and that time alone would heal everything. But deep inside, they already knew the truth. Waiting was only delaying a decision that their heart had quietly made. Every day, the feeling became stronger. Every small disappointment added another piece to the picture until the picture became impossible to ignore. They understood that holding on was costing them more than letting go ever could. When that understanding finally settled inside them, they made a choice that surprised even themselves. It was not loud. It was not filled with anger. There were no dramatic speeches or emotional battles. Instead, there was calm. There was acceptance. They stepped away from someone who no longer matched the person they were becoming. It hurt because endings almost always hurt, even when they are necessary. But beneath the sadness, they discovered something unexpected. They felt lighter. They felt as if a heavy weight had slowly been lifted from their shoulders. They realized that peace often arrives only after we stop fighting against what we already know is true. That quiet feeling of relief became the first sign that they had made the right decision. It was not excitement. It was not instant happiness. It was simply the absence of constant inner struggle. Their mind stopped arguing with their heart. Their heart stopped asking for permission to speak. For the first time in a long while, both parts of them were moving in the same direction. That kind of peace cannot be created by pretending. It only comes when someone chooses honesty over comfort. As that new space opened inside them, something else began to happen. Without the constant noise of a relationship that no longer fit, they finally had room to notice what had always been quietly standing in front of them. Thoughts of you became clearer, not because they were trying to escape into fantasy, but because your presence represented something very different from what they had been experiencing. You reminded them that sincerity still exists. You reminded them that genuine people are still out there. You reminded them that calm, honest energy is often stronger than loud promises that are never kept. The more they reflected, the more they understood that your influence had never been about appearances alone. It was never only about attraction or curiosity. It reached much deeper than that. Your way of living, your steady nature, and your quiet strength made them question many things about their own life. Without saying very much, you encouraged them to ask difficult questions they had avoided for years. Was this the life they truly wanted? Were these the relationships they deserved? Were they living according to their own values, or were they simply following familiar routines because change felt uncomfortable? Those questions stayed with them. They did not disappear after one day. They followed them into quiet evenings, peaceful mornings, and moments when they found themselves alone with their thoughts. Little by little, the answers became impossible to ignore. They recognized how often they had accepted less than they truly wanted. They saw how many times they confused comfort with happiness. They realized that familiarity can sometimes feel safe while quietly keeping a person stuck in the same place. That discovery changed the way they looked at everything around them. Suddenly, they noticed patterns they had overlooked before. Conversations that once seemed normal now felt empty. Promises that once sounded convincing now felt weak. Habits they once defended no longer made sense. It was as though someone had opened a window in a dark room, allowing fresh air and sunlight to enter. Once the light came in, they could clearly see what had been hidden for so long. You may not have realized it, but your authenticity became part of that awakening. You never needed to pressure them. You never needed to prove your worth over and over again. You simply remained true to yourself. In a world where many people wear different masks depending on who they are with, your consistency stood out. You remained the same person whether someone was watching or not. That quiet honesty spoke louder than any speech ever could. Sometimes people believe they change because of advice, but that is not always true. Real transformation often begins when someone meets a person who naturally reflects the qualities they have been searching for without even realizing it. Your presence became that reflection. It reminded them of the person they wanted to become. It reminded them that peace does not come from pretending everything is fine. Peace comes from living in agreement with what your heart already knows. As the weeks passed, they became more aware of how fear had been controlling many of their decisions. Fear of disappointing others. Fear of being judged. Fear of starting over. Fear of losing something familiar, even if it was no longer making them happy. For years, those fears quietly shaped their choices without them fully noticing. But now, they could finally see those fears clearly. And once fear is exposed, it begins to lose the power it once had. Instead of asking themselves why life had become so confusing, they started asking a better question. What kind of future do I truly want to build? That single question changed everything. It shifted their attention away from the past and toward the person they wanted to become. They stopped trying to rescue situations that had already reached their natural ending. They stopped chasing explanations for every disappointment. They started investing their energy in becoming more honest with themselves. Every step they took in that direction made them stronger. It was not because life suddenly became easy. Challenges still appeared. Doubts still visited from time to time. Memories still surfaced without warning. But something inside them had already changed. They no longer wanted temporary comfort if it required sacrificing lasting peace. They no longer wanted relationships built on uncertainty when they knew genuine connection was possible. Most importantly, they no longer wanted to ignore the quiet voice inside them that had been guiding them toward a better path all along. And every time they reflected on that journey, one truth continued returning to their heart. Meeting someone whose character reflects honesty can quietly change the direction of another person's entire life. That realization continues growing inside them every single day, and they are beginning to understand that this story is only the beginning of a much deeper transformation. As this inner transformation continued, they noticed something they had never paid much attention to before. Their standards were quietly changing. Things they once accepted without question no longer felt acceptable. They became more careful about who they allowed into their emotional space. They stopped giving endless chances to people who repeatedly showed them the same unhealthy patterns. They started realizing that protecting their peace was not selfish, it was necessary. Every healthy decision they made helped them feel more connected to the person they were becoming. The interesting part is that this change did not happen because someone gave them a list of rules to follow. It happened because they experienced a new way of looking at life. They discovered that honesty creates peace, while pretending creates exhaustion. They saw that real love does not constantly leave a person wondering where they stand. Real care does not depend on games, confusion, or emotional distance. Instead, it brings stability, respect, and quiet confidence. That understanding became stronger every single day. Whenever your memory came to mind, It was never just about remembering your face or your words. It was about remembering how your energy made them feel. You represented something they had almost forgotten existed. You reminded them that kindness can still be genuine. You reminded them that strength does not always have to be loud. Sometimes, the strongest people are the ones who stay calm, even when life becomes difficult. Sometimes, the greatest courage is simply refusing to become someone you are not. As they looked back over their past, they began connecting pieces that had never made sense before. Situations that once confused them suddenly became clear. They recognized moments when they ignored their instincts because they wanted to avoid conflict. They remembered times when they settled for less because they believed asking for more would only lead to disappointment. Now they could finally see that every one of those experiences had been teaching them something important. Every difficult season had been preparing them to recognize the difference between temporary comfort and lasting peace. This realization gave them a completely different perspective. Instead of feeling angry about the past, they began appreciating the lessons hidden inside it. Even painful memories started carrying new meaning. They understood that every disappointment had slowly guided them toward greater wisdom. Every ending had quietly made room for a better beginning. Every difficult decision had strengthened the part of them that refused to stop searching for something real. The more they accepted these truths, the less interested they became in living for appearances. They no longer cared about relationships that looked perfect from the outside while feeling empty on the inside. They no longer wanted approval from people who never truly understood them. They stopped measuring success by how things appeared to others and started measuring it by how peaceful they felt when they were alone with their own thoughts. That change affected every area of their life. Their conversations became more honest. Their boundaries became healthier. Their decisions became clearer. Instead of constantly seeking reassurance from other people, they began trusting themselves. For the first time in a long while, they believed that their inner voice deserved to be heard. They realized that ignoring it had only delayed their growth. Your influence remained part of that journey, even when you were not physically present. It was not because they placed you on a perfect pedestal. It was because your authenticity reminded them of qualities they wanted to protect within themselves. Every time they thought about the peace they felt around your energy, they were reminded that life does not have to be filled with constant emotional confusion. Healthy connections should bring clarity instead of endless questions. Slowly, their priorities changed. They became less interested in chasing temporary excitement and more interested in building something lasting. They wanted friendships that could survive difficult conversations. They wanted relationships built on honesty instead of assumptions. They wanted a future where trust was not something that had to be earned every single day, because it already existed as the foundation. There were still moments when old habits tried to return. There were days when familiar fears whispered that change was too risky. Those thoughts did not disappear overnight. But now they recognized them for what they were. They understood that fear often speaks the loudest just before someone steps into a better chapter of life. Instead of listening to those doubts, they kept moving forward, one small decision at a time. Every step strengthened their confidence. Every honest conversation made them feel lighter. Every healthy boundary reminded them that respecting themselves was not something to apologize for. They finally understood that saying goodbye to what no longer serves you is not an act of failure. It is often the first act of real self-respect. Looking back now, they can clearly see that this journey was never only about leaving one chapter behind. It was about becoming the kind of person who no longer accepts a life that feels disconnected from their own values. It was about learning that true peace cannot be borrowed from someone else. It must be built from within, through honest choices made day after day. And through all of these quiet changes, one thought continued returning with surprising consistency. Some people enter your life for a reason much greater than you understand in the beginning. They may never force you to change. They may never ask you to become someone different. Yet simply by living with honesty, kindness, and quiet confidence, they awaken something that has been sleeping inside you for years. That is exactly what happened here. Your presence became a reminder that a more meaningful life is possible. Not a perfect life without problems, but a life built on truth instead of fear. A life where decisions come from wisdom instead of pressure. A life where the heart no longer has to fight against what the mind already knows is right. Now they are moving forward with a different attitude. They are no longer searching for distractions that only fill empty hours. They are searching for purpose, peace, and genuine connection. They understand that the strongest relationships are not created by chasing each other endlessly. They are built by two people who have first learned to stand firmly in their own truth. This journey is still unfolding. There is more growth ahead, more lessons to learn, and more clarity waiting to arrive. But one thing has already become certain in their heart. Once someone experiences the power of real authenticity, it becomes impossible to feel completely satisfied with anything that is built on pretense. That lesson has changed them in ways they are only beginning to understand. And the choices they make from this point forward will continue reflecting that quiet but powerful transformation.